Ah.
Richard, just say if you're stuck. I'm still here.
Yes, I've got a message coming up saying about share
I beg your
exclamation mark.
That'll be me. Okay. Give it a try now. Sorry about that, Richard.
I'll
You should be
press the
able to do
green
it.
one again. I'm still getting the same thing.
Give it a minute.
Allow Zoom to show your screen. Open system preferences. I've never had this coming up.
No, what it was, Richard, I'd forgotten I tend to start meetings with screen sharing disabled for participants. I've just enabled it. So what you should see now when you click the normal screen share screen button is you should be able to do it as usual.
It's very awkwardly. It's asking me to change my system, my
Richard, if you haven't used that computer
yeah,
to share screen before, you do have to set it up.
that is obviously true.
I had the problem the first time I did it.
Let's try again.
I actually had to leave the meeting and get the computer to get the right preferences, as it were. Oh, but here we are. It's working.
Is it coming up? Good.
Yep, all is there.
Right. Okay, so you should see this particular directory of all the things I'm going to show you now. Now that's good. I had my heart sank when that started being a problem. The first thing I want to say about using newspapers is if you can possibly avoid it, then it's probably a good idea not to. This is because of Occam's razor. And what I do is I look first of all for local history societies who've obviously got far more resources than we have. And this happens to be one, a screen recording of a local history society that is here. Now, this is a 20-second video of the Rushton, which is in East Northants, and I know very well. And it's got something like 12,000 pages of local history. And you can see here, and you can see my mouse coming across here, but there are all sorts of things, including post office and use. And this is the post office page for them. And you can see here a section of what's going on with the post office, in this particular case, the new post office. And right down at the bottom, even though it's covered up by the streamer here, we've now got a single page devoted to one of the postmen that I'm actually interested in, not through the U3A, but just generally. And so I don't really believe in reinventing the wheel. And if it's been done for you, well, that's so well and good. Now, you notice up here that this was copied, transcribed from the Rushton Argus in 1907. Now, it so happens that the Rushton Argus is a paper that's never been transcribed or copied onto one of the websites. And so apart from me going to Northamptonshire Archives and looking through the roll film for many hours, this is my only source of the information I need for a particular postman. This website has got about half a dozen of their postmen with their obituaries and stories of their lives. And indeed, with this particular postman, with John Seckington, he was interviewed twice shortly after he retired, and those interviews have been transcribed. So it gives first a very good detail of how those postmen lived. Now I'm going to make sure I can get back to the Rushton one. Right, I'm still on the internet, that helps. Right, the second one is again a screen recording of this particular website. And you'll notice that here we've got index of families down there. And this again is an extremely good resource. There's also an index of obituaries. And so if I look up Seckington there, you can see all these ones have been copied from the local paper. And this is just one local local history society who will give you so much detail that you need. There's Jonathan Seckington again, and it then takes us back saying about how he's passed away and what his job was all the way through those early years. So that's my starting point, is don't reinvent the wheel. If you've got the information available from some other source, then probably it's the best idea not to do it. But, come on, there we go. Right, the starting point to me with any piece of work about the newspapers is that you go to Kelly's or one of the other trade directories. Now this happens to be the Kelly's for Taunton in around about 1901. It doesn't really matter when it was, but here we've got the newspapers, and I've put a red highlight around all those newspapers. And this is your starting point because it tells you which papers were read in that area. And first of all, you'll notice down here, Frederick Fisher comes up repeatedly. Now, when you're looking for these papers for the local area were syndicated. And if he owned them, because it involved typesetting, an awful lot of the content will be the same. So the chances are that if you get one paper that is produced by was published by Frederick Fisher, you've read all of them as far as this is concerned. So that to me is the important starting point. You know what the papers are you're looking for. So now we move on to the main method of getting into newspapers. This is the British Newspaper Archive, which I prefer. You can get newspapers elsewhere, but the number of newspapers that have been copied is very restricted if you go into some of the others. The British Newspaper Archive has got the largest number, but there's still an enormous number of newspapers that have never been transcribed, if you call it transcribing, that have been copied onto the net. And you can search for all sorts of things. This is only a screen capture, which I thought was better than trying to do it on the web. So we'll come out of that one. You can see all the things. You can save the pages that you've saved. My account at that particular time has got 26 pages left. You do have to pay for this, but that's the nature of all these things if you do want to get them. The second one here is exactly what you get when you put in a search. This happens to be a search for Taunton postman. Now, in order to make some sort of sense of it, you need to look and sort your dates out as to which dates you want. Now, just with this particular paper, and you can see that I've sorted it out to just the Taunton Courier and Western Advertiser and the Somerset County Gazette. Now, gazettes tend to be just 2 or 3 sides of things like the prices of sheep meat in the local markets, and so they're very factual, whereas this one, the Western Advertiser, is a much more of a newsy newspaper. I've also sorted it out to England and Somerset, and I haven't actually ticked on any of the types of articles, but you can do exactly the same thing. When you get your results, you'll see that the whole page comes up and a little bit is highlighted in blue, which is the bit that's relevant here. Now, once you go on and click on these, you then get charged. But you can work it out as to whether something is going to be of any great relevance to you by checking on these highlights, because you get the first 2 or 3 lines coming up. So this Taunton postman, honoured presentation, retirement, never late in 40 years. And you can see there that James Troke may or may not be of interest to you, but he was known as Jimmy in the Taunton post office. And that's enough to make your mind up, or at least in most cases it is. And then going down further, you've got postman. The only one you get, I find a bit of a pain with putting in postman, is there's a surname postman. And you do tend to get rather a large number of records about people whose surnames are postman, whose jobs are not postman. So you'll just have to accept that as being something that you can live with. Once you've got to that stage and have sorted out your limited number of options by clicking on all these different refinements, then you go to the next stage. And this one, it takes you a little further because I've refined things more. You can also see down here, no, it's not going to do it for me because that's a screen capture. I don't think that's actually going to show us a terrible lot more. Let's come out of that and go to the next one. Right, so when you download it, what you get is this enormous area. And because this is a screenshot, I can't enlarge it. I'll show you that on the next one. Now, when you download, you don't get all these highlights. All of that is Postman. So you do have to remember roughly where your article was. Now, this is one article starting here and going right down to here. There's an awful lot of it. And the chances are it's to do with local news. So in this particular case, we've got the first part of this doesn't seem to be terribly relevant. This is the scanned part of the image. And if you get further into it, you'll find that probably the bit about the postman is right down here. And this is the bit that was absolutely relevant of that particular one. And you can see it's still got this down here. And this A Bond actually is one of the postmen that I'm researching. So he's received his 3 stripes for good conduct and long service. And it now says, and it reminds me that he gets an increase of salary and likewise a pension at the close of service. So there's that entire block that was to do with postmen and other things to do with it has now been reduced to this very small area. This, I'm afraid, is the pluses and minuses of this of going to newspapers. So what sort of things do you get when you sort them out? Well, first of all, and I'm going to refer to my list now. Well, we'll take this one first. Right, so here we've got an enlargement of one of these. Now, because it's a PDF and I downloaded and paid for the PDF, I get the whole page. And so I look down here, and here is the annual dinner of the Taunton Postman. You think, what on earth is this to do with anything? And I'll make it larger. The advantage of these is that usually down the bottom, or let's start off near the top, you usually get a list of people who attended. Now, these dinners, which were almost universal in my experience, that's not the right one, of course. I need to go further down. Had usually somebody quite well known, either a bishop or the local MP who turned up for them. And rather like MPs like to let the cat out of the bag, they like to have something to announce. And so usually in the speech, you'll get that. But the first part here tells you about who some of these people were and who the oldest ones were. So Henry Symes and J. Talbot were the oldest ones in the town. So there's a list of who those people were. And sometimes you get who the senior people are, so the chief messenger and so on as well. But if we keep going down, you then get the announcements that in this particular case, an MP made, which would then get lots of applause. And this one is to do with having a greater the pension rights transferred to relatives, which at this time they weren't. And so that was a little thing to try to get the postman on their side. And you can decide whether or not these things are relevant. But of course, at this stage, you've already paid for it. But you do get some interesting things. And I'm going to go through these fairly systematically. We'll perhaps take the Barnstable dinner one next. Here's another one. Now, this is a screen capture. The point of this, putting this in here, is you can make this bigger when you're on the internet, but at this stage I can't make this any bigger because I've just done it as a screen capture, which isn't as helpful when I'm trying to look at the detail. I also get these blue highlights, which are difficult to remove if you actually want to get them something printed out. And let's go on to this one. Right, this one is really the whole page is from one line. And this one, let's make that bigger. And what we've got down here, if I can find it, is the Taunton Post Office had their own cricket club. And this was their match that took place on July the 29th of this year. So apart from the fact it tells you who they were playing, it also tells you that they actually had a cricket club. And that may or may not be of any relevance to what you're doing, but it's another little extra. We can make an assumption that one of the postmen from Taunton were performing in their cricket club. And you'll see another one later on, which has a particular, which is the last page I should give you, which is also to do with cricket clubs. This one is the post office band dinner. So the Bath postman had a band, and this is not actually uncommon. There's one or two where actually they took up a whole platoon of the local civil defence, and they had dinners usually, and you can sometimes get the orders were printed in the local paper about where they were to go to have their evening of military practice. But this post office band one tells you who were the major performers, and the fact that the postmaster had recently joined and was joining in the band. So that again gives you a good idea, and this happens to be Bath, but no doubt it could be anywhere else. So that's 1902, which is very relevant to the period we're dealing with. So I said about dealing with the pensions and the fact that they'd applauded this, and this one is a particularly poignant one here. Now I'll make it a bit bigger and then move across. So this is Bideford, and I'll read it to you, not the bottom part, but this part, because I think it's worthwhile pointing it out. William Lee, postman of the town for 23 years, so well known to rich and poor, young and old, has died, leaving a large family unprovided for. Two very young and for some years wholly dependent on three others will require help in order to provide for themselves. Their late father was unable, notwithstanding persevering industry, to provide for his family out of the wages as postman and trifling profits of his business. The protracted illness and death of his wife 2 years ago added to his many difficulties and filled his latter days with anxiety. His continuing for his children's sake to pursue his heavy work as postman while suffering under heart disease brought his life to a premature close. It's proposed by several friends and relatives to raise a subscription to be vested in the hands of the trustees for the benefit of the children. And then there's a list of people obviously there. This reminds you very poignantly that pensions, whilst quite good for the period for the pensioner, did not stretch to any family members. And I thought this was particularly poignant there. And William Lee is another man that I have looked at, nothing to do with the U3A, to see how his career worked. And he did die, and his children were heading for the workhouse. And they did get some money from, as far as I can work out, but they still ended up in the workhouse. Unfortunately. Another thing that I find interesting here is every year you tend to get the costs of the post office put out, who was getting what amount of money. And if I can find it there, here we are. Now, I've seen this in many local newspapers. Every year, these details were produced, and there it shows you the cost, the salaries of each of the postmasters, sub-postmasters, clerks. And if you look at the details we've already got of the number of people in the transcriptions we've been doing, you can actually work out what the average salary was if you can see what the whole lot cost. And then assistance, the secretarial help and so on comes down here. So it's very useful to be able to work out the cost per person of each different level. And so this one happens to be the one for, I'll get it in a minute, Somerset. It's the Central Somerset one, but and I've got another one as well, which shows it to you. Yes, that was this one. So the local post office and their staff. So there you've got exactly the same. This is Glastonbury, showing the cost of the service and so on, and the total for the country as a whole as well. And I think that's quite interesting to be able to put down an average of what a postman would have cost to the exchequer, as it were. Another thing I find interesting, one of the people I'm researching for myself is the person who went and collected the mail from the trains and brought it up to the head office. Now, you will find train timetables in here. This happens to be the Daily Report, which is for the Northamptonshire area, and again, which I'm interested in, Althorp, you know, with Princess Diana. The station's been closed for many years, but the one that interests me is the one down here for Higham Ferrers. And I'm researching the man who did these, and he worked for 19 hours a day. He was on duty. He had to attend 5 different deliveries of trains, the trains post on the train from Northampton. Each one of the trains that he went to is marked on here, and he ended up having to collect the first one at 5:45 in the morning and the last one fairly late at night. And he said that in his, and going back to the Rushton Local History Society details of his interview, he said for the first 5 years of his postal work, he didn't get more than 4 hours sleep a night because the trains came at just such an awkward time. And he then had to lug all the mail, including the parcels, up a fairly steep hill from the station to the head post office. And it was extremely hard work, so he said. And if he said so, who am I to disagree with him? So do look at these, because many of your postmen will be collecting from the train service. And therefore you can just see how many times they had to turn up to get the mail. Right, we'll move down. I think probably I'll show you one or two of the ones from Rushton. This one I haven't showed you before. This one is the second of the postman that was there. I haven't managed to get the image, not that it really matters. And in the local article, it gives all the details about his working life when he was interviewed before he died. And that some of the local papers seem to interview people like postmen long before they die, so they can write up a good obituary. And very useful it is to us too. And I think probably I won't put too many more in. There's one I do want to put in, which I found, which actually has nothing to do with anybody here, but is a little bit of light relief to do with yes, I don't think there's any more to put in. This one I liked, and I'll leave it to you to read it, because I think it puts the whole thing in proportion. Well, I hope you've had a chance to read that. I think probably I've given you as many opportunities. It's basically try it out and see what you get. The things that I think would be important to point out, and like the ex-teacher I am, you need to give a quick summary of the bullet points that are relevant to this. First of all, find out what the papers are that you're looking at. Secondly, find out if they're available. And I think you'll find that the British Newspaper Archive has the biggest collection, although some of the others are there. You've got to decide if you're going to pay for downloading pages, because there's not a terrible lot of not a terrible lot of point doing this unless you're prepared to pay about £1 a sheet. But you can buy pages one at a time, and if you log on, you can get 3 sheets for nothing. They'll let you do 3 just for registering. The second thing is to think about what you put in as your search. Putting in post office brings you a number of things that you don't want. In this period, many people use the post office to receive applications for jobs, notably people going into service in large houses. So the post office acted as a clearinghouse for job applications. So if you put in post office, you'll get vast numbers of adverts for people who want to, where people in country houses want grooms and any other of the whole range of domestic service people, and they will then have the applications delivered to the post office. But if you do put in post office, try to put in the town first, because then it will limit the number of options. I've put in searches for things like post office or postal pensioner and this type of thing, and ended up with 17 or 18,000 references. And obviously it's not practical to go through those. But if you use all the filters on the left-hand side of the screen and whittle it down, I'm sure you'll find not a vast number, but certainly a group of very useful comments about the pensioners you're looking at. And if, like me, you get sidetracked, you'll find an awful lot of interesting stories that have absolutely nothing to do with postal pensioners. And at which point I shall unshare my screen, and hopefully you've enjoyed what I've talked about.